20 years in Arkansas, 25 in Washington, 2 campaigns and hundreds of millions of dollars, and she saw the state and the nation get redder. The state's half-dozen delegates to Washington keep their seats in a cakewalk. Already a decided minority, the Democrats in the legislature see their number continue to shrink. Where, from here, do the parties go? A special edition of Arkansas Week, next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
This is Arkansas Week.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yes, it's a roundtable for this edition, not our usual gathering of reporters, but a panel of those not only directly involved in the political process, but who study it and apply what they've learned in the classroom. You may recall we put together a similar special edition of Arkansas Week about a month before the election. And what an election this one was, perhaps the biggest upset in American presidential politics, an election that anchored both chambers of Congress in Republican waters, and in Arkansas, an election that expanded GOP majorities in both houses of the legislature and returned to Washington the 6 members of the state's congressional delegation, all Republicans. At the same time, voters raised the cap on state economic development bonding authority and approved medical marijuana. Where from here? Joining us tonight, Heather Yates of the UCA Political Science Department, Chris HOUSENICK of the Arkansas Tech Political Science Faculty, and Doyle Webb, chair of the Republican Party of Arkansas, Michael PAKKO, the chair of the Libertarian Party of Arkansas, and Vince INSALACO, chair of the Democratic Party. We're going to try to keep this as loose as we can and just see what kind of ideas we can kick around. But Mr. Chairman Webb, let me start with you. You had a very good Tuesday night.
We did. It was a good night for Arkansas. It was a good night for the nation. We saw people participate in the process that had never participated in a number of years, and that's good for representation in the democracy.
What are you going to do with these majorities?
I hope that...
and focusing on the state level.
On the state, I feel that Governor Hutchinson will lead them well, that we will continue making government more efficient and effective, that we will continue reducing taxes, creating jobs, and making Arkansas a better place to live in.
Vince INSALACO, not such a good night.
No, it was not. We need to be mindful of the fact that this is the second time in 16 years that someone will be inaugurated president, or Republican will be inaugurated president, without having had the majority vote in the United States. And I'm not sure that what that's telling us yet. I'm not sure what the Party of Family Values is telling us when a representative in Maumelle is reelected that's been married 3 times and was caught using hooker websites, and a guy lost that went and knocked on 5,000 doors and has been married all of his life for 40 years. So and you know, we just passed marijuana from the, obviously with the help of the Party of Family Values. So I'm not sure what that's telling us, and I think those are legitimate questions that we have to ask.
Michael PAKKO, let me, for the independents, and let me, if I may, include you. Well, let's just go with the Libertarian Party. Checking the Florida numbers, Governor Johnson got his share of the Florida vote exceeded the deficit by Secretary Clinton. She could have carried Florida rather easily. There's no way really of knowing how the independent vote or the Libertarian vote in Florida would have broken one way, either for Mr. Trump or for Secretary Clinton. But are these 3rd, 4th, and 5th parties, is their function in recent years primarily to be a spoiler for either party?
Oh, I don't believe so at all. I think what we exist to do, the independents and third-party candidates, is to provide voters with a choice when they find the others unpalatable. I think in several surveys I've seen, the people who vote Libertarian or third party in general, about half of them would not have voted at all if their choice was not on the ballot. About the other half, the votes are pretty evenly distributed between Republicans and Democrats, who they would have voted for if a gun were pointed at their head and they had no other choice. So I don't think that the role of the third party is a spoiler at all. It's giving the voters an option, another option that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Well, let me turn to our academics here, and Heather, we'll start with you. What animated voters, if we know, at the state level?
Well, at the state level, and I think it could be said of the national level, although there's some nuance here, but at the state level, the campaign, starting with the primary and as early as the summer of 2015, started focusing on feelings, gestures, and rhetoric. But what underscored all of this were issues, and depending on what your subject position was, whether you were the party, you were the candidate, the campaign apparatus, or the voter, you were tapping into one of those three mechanisms, and also applying that interpretation onto your own situation, which is underscored by economic conditions. You know, one of the leading questions in a campaign that political scientists and social scientists like to ask is, are you better than you were 4 years ago? And do you think the country is headed in the right direction? And depending on the answer to those two questions, that motivated voters. We also saw a lot of voters explain, and actually I had conversations with these types of voters that said, I have been eligible to vote for the last 10 years. It was this election that I was mobilized. And I followed up and asked why. And the issues are very nuanced. They are single issues that they pointed out that motivated them. They either fell onto economic side, or it was a social issue. And in this case, the regular or the usual suspects were at play: abortion and economics. And economics was tied to the direction of the country not being interpreted as very healthy.
Yeah, Chris, do you pick up anything?
Much of a similar idea. I also think there was a matter of fatigue with the electorate coming in. When you start looking at the last presidents, you've had a father-son combination, you had the possibility of a husband and wife, and that evidence was actually out there in the primaries. One of the best organized and best funded campaigns was the Jeb Bush campaign, and he flamed early, got very little traction, and you saw that symptom, you know, when you got to the general election too. It's another, you know, it's the wife of a former president. And I think, you know, if Hillary Clinton was named anything besides Clinton, that probably would have helped her prospects.
Yeah, so no more a distaste for dynastic politics at that level. Mm-hmm. All right, now, let's take a look at the state here. Doyle, Chairman Webb, the immediate, I guess, target is state fiscal policy. The titular head of your party, the governor, has announced that he wants some tax cuts. Within the party, there is at least some pushback on that based on revenue reports. You've also facing the possibility, you now have a president-elect who has vowed to eliminate Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Replace it with what, we're not sure, but that could have some pretty profound implications for state budget policy down the road. You've got a couple of balls there in the air.
Sure. Well, I think that we'll see our governor lead the legislature very well. I think that President Trump will propose maybe block grants to come back to the states, and I know that Governor Hutchinson in the past has supported the idea of block grants for health care. Just as we have some in the party that want to be cautious of tax cuts, there are others in the party that want larger tax cuts, believing it will create job and create opportunity. So I think there will be a balance found within the party and within the legislature. I think they'll move very cautiously and carefully to come up with the right result.
Well, I mean, there's going to be a tax cut.
That's correct.
Good, right. INSALACO, how much pushback can for example, let's take block grants, which Chairman Webb brought up a second ago. To most Democrats, anathema.
To most Democrats, what?
It's just anathema, the idea of block grants as opposed to...
Well, sure. You know, in Arkansas, specifically, without the Affordable Care Act, we'll become Kansas. I mean, you don't have any choice. I mean, there'll be at least $150 million budget deficit. And you're going to have to, and they've already shown their willingness to cut library funding, pre-K funding, senior center funding, Meals on Wheels. You can already see the programs that are going to be targeted, as was exampled in the last fiscal session. So they're going to obviously have to, but constitutionally, balance the budget. There's not any question about that. Where the money is going to come from, and you include a tax cut on top of that deficit, because a block grant's not going to cover all of it. So it's just we're absolutely opposed to it. People who think that we've given up are wrong. Hell no, we've just begun to fight. So this is not over. This was a difficult election for Democrats, clearly, but I think a lot of Democrats have been woken up. Clearly, Secretary Clinton got the majority of the vote. I think I read this morning by 1.2 million, which is almost 3 times the vote that Vice President Gore won by. So there's a lot to be done here. I think one thing that we haven't talked about at all is what's going to happen to the court, the Supreme Court, and how that affects people in Arkansas. And I'm very concerned about that. And I think this is not going to be an easy, pretty 2 years.
That figures into the abortion component.
It does.
Anyway.
It does. And instead of the conversation pivoting around abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, it was
gay marriage,
and same-sex marriage, and LGBTQI rights. It really hinged on the conversation, and the narrative was defined by court appointment, and that was the signaled language of social issues at that point in time, and it rolled into that, and that was a pivotal issue that really kind of replaced the narrative of the social issue talk that we heard in 2004.
Absolutely, it's true.
Yep. Yeah. I want to jump back on something that Vince said that's incorrect. The governor in his budget, upcoming budget, has proposed an increase in pre-K funding, has proposed an increase in library funding, and proposed an increase in senior center funding. Only 2 Republican governors, Governor Huckabee and Governor Hutchinson, have ever proposed pre-K funding increases. As Governor Beebe came into office with an $800 million surplus, he proposed no increases. So this is all a fallacy. It's smoke and mirrors on the part of the Democrats. You know, we're willing to work with them. I think it's time that we start working together and developing the things that are best for Arkansas. Now, to go back to the Supreme Court, I think it was a key issue in Arkansas.
Let me come back to you guys, but go ahead and finish.
It was a key issue in the race. I think it was a motivating factor in this presidential race. I think, as you said earlier, there was the jobs and the economy issue, but there was also the Supreme Court issue that was out there. And that motivated a lot of our base to get out and vote.
Back to you, Vince.
Well, this is what confuses people. When Chairman Webb just said what he said, which is an absolute, it's just simply wrong.
What did I say
wish,
wrong,
I mean,
Vince?
the Republican Party took pre-K. They think, and you had candidates who said that it was a political issue, not an academic issue anymore, and completely wiped it out of their platform as if it doesn't exist.
That is incorrect.
It is not incorrect.
We never had it in our platform. Okay?
My point
Because
exactly.
it was
Stay
left,
off my side.
it was
That's
left
exactly
for
right.
it was left for individual candidates to look at and propose, because we knew that Governor Huckabee and Governor Hutchinson were the only Republican governors, and the Democrat governor, Beebe, had not proposed increasing funding for pre-K. Now, it turned out not to be an issue.
The only way pre-K stays even is if $2 million a year is added to it. We all know that. $2 million did not get added to it. So it was cut. The $2 million did not get added to it. So when you say that, you're just being misleading.
So why didn't Governor Beebe propose fully funding pre-K with the $800 million surplus that Governor Huckabee left, Vince?
Well, I would venture he had $1 billion worth of Lakeview school improvements.
I don't think that's the case, Steve. Okay, but I won't argue with you on
the
that.
the bill was coming due there, Mr.
But
Chairman.
no proposal was made by Governor Beebe to increase pre-K funding. That's a fact.
All right, Michael PAKKO, the business of government spending, the size of government, whether it's block grants or the Affordable Care Act.
Block grants that you were talking about with Obamacare, I think that's one area of policy where we tend to agree with the Republicans in that we're not happy about the things like the mandates on employers and individuals on health insurance. Certainly there are aspects of those programs that people find attractive and have worked, but I think the problems in our healthcare system and the problems in government in general are just too much government control, not enough free market influence, price signals aren't allowed to work, market mechanisms are not functioning properly, and so libertarians would probably go even further than the Republicans would if we had a say in this.
Let me go back to Vince for just a second. Underperforming by Democratic candidates from Secretary Clinton all the way down compared to past elections. Why?
Why have Democrats underperformed?
Yeah.
Well,
including African Americans.
Yeah.
And her share, it was Secretary Clinton's share anyway, of the Latino vote was not what they had anticipated.
Yeah. You mean the fact that Donald Trump got 29% of the Hispanic vote? Is that your question? That Donald Trump got 29% of the Hispanic vote?
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
Clearly, the message that the DNC and our candidates was overshadowed by what the Trump circus was taking all over the country. I mean, it's just that's absolutely what happened. And to your point about whether or not you talked about the Electoral College, about do third-party candidates, are they spoilers? I think they're spoilers as long as there's an Electoral College. I think they're not spoilers if there is just an open vote. I mean, Hillary Clinton got the majority of the votes by 1%, by over 1%. But as long as there's an Electoral College that's as ancient as our Constitution, then this is what's going to happen, is that the majority of people in the country who voted were not served. So, I just think, and I want to go on the record of saying, I think the next 2 or 3 years is going to be very, very difficult. I don't think you're going to see people sit back and say that it's okay to overturn Roe versus Wade. It's okay to overturn same-sex marriage. It's okay to overturn voter rights or civil rights. It's okay to overturn the Affordable Care Act. I just don't think you're going to see people sit back and take that on a national level or here in Arkansas. I think it's going to be, I think it's up to the Republicans who are now in command of everything to reach out with an olive branch and say, how can we work together? How can we sit down and figure out how to fix this canyon, that's this divide that's between the Democrats and the Republicans?
Indeed. How?
Well, I think you're going to get an early signal into that with the Supreme Court pick. Donald Trump has to pick somebody that Republicans will accept, but also at least 15 to 20 Democrats to confirm that nomination. So he's going to have to address both sides of the aisle, and that's going to be where he gets to practice his bipartisanship. Everybody talks about it on the campaign trail. There's a difference between campaigning and governing. And now he is going to have to try and find that split between the two sides, somebody that will get that Democratic support to get to the supermajority necessary for confirmation.
Or blow the filibuster rule.
And one of the early concerns that the Republican Party had about the early emergence of a Donald Trump candidacy and even a presidency is that he would govern more from the middle than the conservative right, and he'd be much more moderate than the conservative right was comfortable with. So this nomination will signal that to the party and also signal that to the Democrats of how moderate versus conservative, or how he will be taking advice from the groups advising him on this appointment. All this assuming that there will be no confirmation hearing in a lame duck session, which I don't anticipate being the issue, right? But just to articulate that we are operating on the assumption that there will be no lame duck activity on this in the session. So I think that's also something that we are looking at from the President-elect Donald Trump. Where is he going to be on the ideological continuum? I think it's going to be issue-driven. I think on some issues he is going to receive counsel that will push him further to the right, and on other issues he's going to be pushed further to governing from the middle. What those issues are, they're still up in the air, but that's something that we are all looking at and scrutinizing, is who these nominees, or who his short list is at least.
And he does have to do. Elections do matter. Elections have consequences. He did say that he was going to interview his nominees, that he was going to make sure they were pro-life, that they were against gay marriage. I mean, he said all of those things. He said that he's going to build a wall, that he's going to take 15 million undocumented people and kick them out of the country. I mean, now whether he goes to that extreme or not, we'll have to see. But he did say that he is going to act on those things. And I just don't see how that brings the country together at all.
Well, let me say this, of the Supreme Court appointments, he presented a list and has released a list that is acceptable to certainly conservatives and Republicans. And I anticipate that it'll be an originalist to the Constitution. That's what Antonin Scalia was, and I think that we will replace Anthony with that similar type person. I have great hope that the Republican Congress, Republican Senate, and the Republican President will work well together, will do their best to bring in Democrats into the process, and that this country will move forward in the first 100 days. I can foresee executive orders being rescinded early on. I don't know what those are, but I know that they're working on rescinding some of the executive orders, some of the overreach of this government. I think that we'll look at a jobs program. I think that we'll look at repeal and replacing Obamacare to get this economy moving forward, and we'll look at a good Supreme Court appointee and confirmation early on. That's what I have hope for, and that's what I believe will happen.
Let me raise this. Did last Tuesday, and mindful that it was just about a 50-50 popular vote election, and that a couple of the old Rust Belt states, Secretary Clinton barely lost them, but she barely lost them. Did we in fact see the New Deal, the old Democratic coalition, did we see its last gasp last Tuesday night, or did it just need a little more juice?
Well, I think in terms of heading into the Tuesday night election, there's been concern about the New Deal coalition kind of dissolving, mainly because early on what we were seeing in the voting cohorts that Trump was attracting, white male, blue collar, skilled labor. Where do we find those states? Ohio. We find that in definitely Pennsylvania, and in some aspects, Florida, the Panhandle, northern Florida, and this has been something that I know from where I'm at in my discipline. We were focusing on this because there was a lot of movement across both parties, and it was not zero sum either. So some of the movement away from the Democrats was also being replaced with movement away from the Republicans too. So in terms of, is this dissolving the New Deal coalition, I think that's an argument that does have traction. I can't say definitively today that it's dead or it looks different, but there's definitely movement there, and then that signals to me focusing on a possible realignment. There has been a shift in the supporting coalitions of these parties, but how that shifted, we are still studying those ripples.
We haven't heard the term Reagan Democrats in a while, although it may have been over you.
That's true.
Can you keep them?
I think we can keep them. I think I'm excited about
Clinton brought them back.
But I think that Trump and the new coalition will remain with the Republican Party, certainly for a while. If we keep our promises, they will be with us. And I think that Wisconsin, it was time that Wisconsin came into the fold, and some of those Rust Belt states into the fold. And I want to clearly say that we may talk about a close election nationally, but in Arkansas, Hillary Clinton only received about 33% of the vote. The people that knew her best in Arkansas did not vote for her. She barely got the Democrat generic vote in this state. That speaks volumes of where the Democratic Party is and where the Republican Party is, that those ideas of the Democrat Party, maybe the Roosevelt coalition, are tired and worn out, and we're ready to move on to a new day in Arkansas and in this nation.
The Roosevelt coalition, the Obama coalition, they both kind of failed, Vince. How do you rebuild?
Well, the last time I was here, and what I've been saying for the last 2 years, is that the Democratic Party in Arkansas is essentially 2 years old. I mean, I've said this the last time I was here. I mean, we were the party of default, if you would. small d, not big D. And now the Republican Party is the party, as we saw what Warlaw did today. I mean, you know, he's been happy to be a Democrat all these years, and all of a sudden, you know, he's turned to be an R. You know, we saw that happen before. You know, rebuilding takes cycles. It takes several cycles. And we have seen, in terms of party rebuilding, we've seen it happen up in Boone County. You know, a former Republican legislature is now the chairman of the Democratic Party of Boone County. You know, I mean, it's going to take several cycles for us to do it. But to suggest, look, there are no, I've said this until I'm blue in the face, there are no longer any permanent majorities. It will not, it may, I don't know how long, many cycles it'll be. Maybe it'll change in 18, maybe it'll change in 20. But if the Trump coalition does what they say and moves 15 million undocumented people out of the country and builds a wall and reverses Roe versus Wade and same-sex marriage and all that sort of thing, it's just a question of time before the Democrats take over. I would rather us work together, but you're talking about moving the country backwards 50 years. It's been a lot of blood in the streets to get this country to where it is today, and I would hate to see us reverse all that.
Let me squeeze this one in because we've just got seconds remaining. And Chairman Webb, I'll start with you. Titular Governor Hutchinson adamantly opposed to the marijuana initiative, and yet it passed, not by a huge margin, but you got it. That may have been your big loss on
well,
Tuesday night.
our position was that we were against the decriminalization of marijuana. Okay, we did not endorse it like the Democrat Party did. I'm hopeful that federal enforcement
well, the head
will
of
come
your
about.
party certainly did.
I know. I certainly hope the federal enforcement will come in and start prosecuting doctors who prescribe marijuana because it's illegal under federal law. And so there may be a question of what happens now that we have a new federal administration.
What happened?
Of course, you just also have to say that 2/3 of the people in the United States now have access to some sort of marijuana. I'm not sure that you're going to see criminalization of it happen much longer.
And I know what these criticisms of federal overreach went on this.
Yeah, I mean, I should go to Chairman for Mr. Johnson's Arkansas.
Oh, yeah, most libertarians are pleased with the passage of Issue 6. I think we're actually concerned about too much government involvement in the distribution of marijuana for medical purposes under that act. I think more of our members favored number 7, which was shut down by the courts. But that was perhaps one of our victories in this election.
They're waving us off, but let me try to squeeze this in. Arkansas, abortion, no. Same-sex marriage, no.
Right.
So many other cultural issues. Marijuana, yes. Not huge, but yes.
Right. So this also reminds me to a few years back when all 75 counties passed the minimum wage issue, right? There's this disconnect between issues and party ownership. And I don't think that the voters saw medical marijuana as owned by a partisan stance. And so they voted pure economics on this one, apparently, and not partisan.
Got to wrap it up because we're out of time. Thanks to everybody for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.